Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Boruto anime review. This one is going to be for episode 202, which is called The Cult. So, like I was talking about last week, this was going to be a big episode because of the Sasuke stuff that we got in this episode. And I think seeing it animated here, having obviously known about this from the manga for a while, it still hits just as hard because it's so big in terms of, okay, we sort of knew Kara had an Otsutsuki connection because Boro directly mentioned it last episode and he mentions it here. But also that like Jigen appears to be sort of familiar with the idea of like Momoshiki and so on. But the reveal here is so big in terms of, no, like Otsutsukis are at the core of what we're dealing with here, which I find to be like absolutely fascinating. And I've said it since I think pretty early Boruto when like Momoshiki was introduced. That like, okay, Boruto's overall goal I think across the series is I think going to be heavily exploring the Otsutsuki, and I think we're going to get like far even beyond what we're introduced to here. I think we're going to go far even beyond this in terms of what it's about. And I'm really excited to get that just from a sort of lore, world building aspect. Because again, this is an alien species within Naruto. They're from, different planets. They travel planet to planet. They sort of just by default like have the ability to, transfer between dimensions. And they have this kind of area set up in this alternate dimension that Sasuke goes to here. And so the reveal on this side of the episode, which is so interesting, is that we see these carvings on this rock face. And then there's a sort of like altar and it has a kind of prison underneath. So on the rock face, it's three pairs of Otsutsuki symbols. So you have it's sort of like, organized like a podium. You've got like a pair in the middle, a pair kind of down here on the side, and a pair down here. And so it sort of creates a little bit of an order to it in that like the central pair is kind of really interesting, and the top of the central pair is clearly the most notable Otsutsuki, because the first one Sasuke goes to is Kinshiki, who's the bottom of one of the pairs on the sides. And it's like, okay, cool. He touches that pattern, and then it seems like Kinshiki just appears, but it's just sort of a hologram of him. Now, I don't really remember. Let me just check the manga actually to see if I absolutely have this for sure. Yeah, they add in the anime the idea that the hologram like moves and reacts if you're on the sort of platform where the hologram is. In the manga, it literally is just a pretty like straightforward, like solid picture of the Otsutsuki. So there's no real like movement or motion. Here they show motion, which I think adds a little bit extra onto it in terms of, okay, it's animation, you want to show some sense of movement, but it also means like, whoa, how does this even work? Like, it's one thing like activating it and it shows a picture. It's another to kind of have almost like this like, living picture effectively of each of these Otsutsuki that can react to things but is unable to like accomplish anything. Makes me really question, like, I suppose, what this overall area that they're in like actually like is for necessarily. It seems to be some sort of a like Otsutsuki, almost like organizational kind of hub type thing, in that the connection between all these Otsutsuki is ultimately, like Sasuke notes, these are all Otsutsuki who came to Earth. But it then asks the question of like, Earth already has a tailed beast, a ten tails. What's this other one for? And like, where did it come from? And like, what is going on? There's so many questions you have, because like I haven't even finished talking about the Otsutsuki, and then like there's a ten tails here. That's massive. That's huge. Like that was like the ten tails was like the focus of the big sort of a lot of the finale stuff with Naruto. And then there's just another one here, and Jigen is able to like kind of control it. That's huge. But anyway, so Sasuke reacts to the Kinshiki kind of picture, realizes it's just a hologram. he goes up, and the next one, of course, is Momoshiki. Momoshiki is the top of that pairing, which makes sense because, of course, Kinshiki sort of sacrificed himself to add power to Momoshiki, so that fits the sort of, structure, in a way, of the clan as we know it. But that pairing was a side pairing to the middle one, which is Kaguya, but Kaguya is on the bottom. That's very interesting because we've always viewed her as being the Otsutsuki, but this obviously, like with where they've gone with this, we've met other Otsutsukis as well that they don't even reference in this scene. Like Kaguya is perhaps not as important as we think, but it just highlights that wow, we're talking about multiple Otsutsuki here. This is a real issue, like that our characters are going to have to deal with here. And then, of course, attention turns to, well, if Kaguya was only the second, who was the first? Who was the main Otsutsuki as part of this pair? And that's when we're introduced to this, as of now, unnamed Otsutsuki. But, interestingly, what they do is, of course, they get across the idea of the different horn patterns of each of the Otsutsukis as being like the key trait that sort of distinguishes them. That's kind of interesting. But this guy, they show the image, and like Sasuke's like, I've never seen him before. But then Jigen shows up, and he takes chakra from the Ten Tails, and this activates Jigen's karma, which results in the horn matching the Otsutsuki that he just saw. So it's this very interesting situation where you're kind of like, oh, well, if, as we've been revealed already, if Boruto has like Momoshiki effectively, inside him is effectively the way we know that, then Jigen has this other Otsutsuki inside him, which asks the question of like, how did that happen? And what's going on here? Because, Boruto is like kind of still in control of his own like faculties. Jigen seems to know what's going on with the Ten Tails, even though the explanation so far would lead us to believe that like he's just a separate person who happens to have this Otsutsuki thing going on with him. So like there's a lot of questions that you still have about all of this, that if you read the manga you can find out now, because we've got far enough into the story to know the answers. I'm not going to spoil them here, but it's very interesting that you can look back on this chapter and realize that, oh, some of the dialogue that Jigen says does sort of answer enough of your questions about things, and that like he mentions to the Ten Tails, it's not like time, it's not ready for you to eat me just yet, wait until the like vessel is prepared. And it's like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Like, well, what's that about? Like talking about like he wants to feed someone to the Ten Tails. What's that about? Just like a really like interesting idea and concept there. So that reveal is kind of huge, and especially just having like Sasuke be there witnessing this. There's a Ten Tails just below him. The main enemy has just appeared in this dimension, and Sasuke's just there like, what's going on? He needs to get this information back to the village as soon as possible. But the bigger twist is that Jigen basically says, I guess I'll go check on the two vessels now. And he's off to go to the Leaf Village straight away. And the preview is already teasing, the idea that, like, next episode, he's going to be fighting Naruto. He's going to be in contact with Kawaki and Boruto. That's going to be a fascinating moment. And that's why, like, I was hyping up, of course, the major reveals with the Otsutsuki in this episode. But also, the plot super heavily kicks into gear from here on out, with this reveal about Jigen and the Otsutsukis are at the center of this. But there's so much more to it, because then you remember there's the third pairing that's all kind of destroyed basically. The markings on the wall are kind of marked out. Who are they? Now, of course, we know other Otsutsukis. We know of Urashiki Otsutsuki and Toneri Otsutsuki. Toneri, I don't think is part of this because I think we got clarified in the last movie that he's like from like a kind of side branch of the Otsutsuki family. Um, Urashiki, I suppose, could be one of them. My guess is that if he is one of them, he might be the second. It would be the bottom of that pairing, which still leads to the idea that there is a very notable Otsutsuki potentially out there somewhere that we don't know about. But it might, if Urashiki is part of it, I think the potential fate of that other Otsutsuki might be sort of inadvertently like revealed to us through how technically a lot of this stuff works. Now, in the anime, we're going to be waiting, I think, a decent bit before we get to the proper explanation. I think where non-spoilers, I can just reveal what's going on. But it relates to information that we learned in this episode. But either way, it's this idea that we know of like this at least potentially one, if not two other new Otsutsukis who are also potentially like related to Earth in some way. Because you ask the question then, like, okay, why would an Otsutsuki? Because it really realistically it has to be an Otsutsuki who kind of destroyed those carvings on the walls. Why would they do that? In that, I'm guessing what it does is it hides their identity. Their horn markings aren't there on the wall, and it can't be activated to show them visually. Why is that the case? Is there like some sort of an issue, a feud within the Otsutsuki clan? There's questions like that you definitely have. And especially when some of the reveals that they'll get into about the Otsutsuki and this situation, more of their sort of planning and what they're about, you maybe are a little bit more understanding of what's actually going on. But again, what we know so far here is just absolutely like fascinating. One of the bigger sort of like lore reveals we've had in the series in terms of just like, this is like incredible, fascinating information, like new Ten Tails in play. This major reveal about Jigen and what they're about. And I like that they coincided with Boro. And the Boro side of this episode, even though this is not in the manga at all, this Boro arc here with the cult is completely anime new, but it's obviously canon. The most interesting thing, of course, is that like he's mentioning the Infinite Tsukiyomi, but he's specifically talking to just people about the Otsutsuki as if like that's what his cult is about. He's getting people on the side of the Otsutsuki that like they are actual gods and the leaders of the world effectively, killed multiple gods, and look at these miracles that I can perform because I was given a gift by the one god that's left. And he mentions all of this. He mentions Kaguya by name as being part of like the Infinite Tsukiyomi thing, and again she was defeated by Naruto and everyone. He mentions Momoshiki and Kinshiki, but does mention that there is one left. And I've met that one. I know him. He gave me this indestructible body. And he demonstrates that at the end of the episode, of course. I just think that's like super interesting that, like his cult isn't just him doing this complete side project thing. It is ultimately related to what's going on, which we now know is that Kara ultimately follows an Otsutsuki. That Jigen, we don't know the full details about it, but effectively he has the powers of an Otsutsuki, and somewhere in him in some way is an Otsutsuki. Right now with the information you don't know everything, but something along those lines is the case. We saw what he was able to do with drawing power from the Ten Tails, appearing in that dimension at will. He's super, super powerful. And obviously the idea is that theoretically he was the one who pinned down that Ten Tails. So that's super notable. And yeah, like I do wonder exactly where they're going with Boro, because I might need to rewatch the preview again, but I don't remember seeing Boro in the preview. Maybe I'm just misremembering something there, but I'm guessing they'll do it similarly to this, where it probably will just be maybe 1 or 2 scenes with Boro per episode as we go on, and not necessarily be this like really focused cult arc, because I don't know, like they sort of were setting up something with the girl, the sort of main follower of Boro, Inori I think is her name, and then her brother comes in to try and get her out. Like, is that actually going to be a major plot, or are we sort of done with it as of this? That's where I'm not entirely sure in terms of like who's going to be like drawn into this. Are we going to like? We're not going to take down the cult, I don't think. Um, it's just hard to connect the dots because they're activating the main plot. Like Jigen's going to appear at Naruto's house next week. Um, there's no time to also really deal with the other side of things. So I'm guessing what they're doing with Boro here is more of just we're learning more about him and what he's up to. He supports the idea of the infinite Tsukiyomi and the idea that he will get people on his side, downtrodden people who feel that the things aren't going their way. They live in like poverty. They're ill. They're sick. Nothing's going right. Those people he can get on board with the idea of the infinite Tsukiyomi, that living this infinite dream where all your desires are fulfilled is something that appeals to them. That supporting actual gods which can make these things happen is a valid choice compared to the harsh reality of the real world. That's actually a very interesting concept that, you know, by the end of Naruto we were so focused on the idea of like taking down Kaguya to end the war that, you know, you brings up the idea of like, yeah, there would, I suppose, be some people who would be sort of like for that idea of like their lives are so, things just aren't going so well that they'd actually be for the idea of willingly going into the infant Tsukiyomi. And, you know, you have to connect a few of the dots here of like, Jigen has a Ten Tails. We sort of roughly know what a Ten Tails is used for. I think, again, with some of the other setup from before, with the mention of the Vine Tree, with the Victor arc, you can, I think, connect a few of the dots here pretty nicely to see what they're going for. It's a familiar plot, but we know it's sort of the Otsutsuki imperative to a degree. So that's all like really interesting to me, that like they're bringing up all of these plot threads. I still have a lot of questions even where we are in the manga right now, but you know, so far so good. I think like the anime is doing a really really good job here with this arc, and that like I'm getting behind Boro a bit more as a character, whereas I thought he was a little bland just because we didn't have any real setup or character arc for him before he was like thrust into the spotlight, like big fight. Now it feels like, okay, this cult leader idea creates something for him, that he's able to get people on his side, and he seems to, you know, you're sort of waiting for what the twist is, I suppose. Like he's helping people here, but obviously he's ultimately supporting a pretty like crazy idea. You know, what's going to be the thing that really makes you go like, oh no. Like we know like that there's the idea of like an infinite Tsukiyomi ultimately is a really terrible thing, but is he like sacrificing people in the background or something like that? Obviously, like the idea based on what he says, he kills the girl's brother, so there is that kind of harsh aspect to him, and we don't know how he killed the brother. Like he just put his hand up and seemingly he just died. So like what was going on there? In addition to like I think a few episodes ago he like healed someone by basically just doing the exact same thing. He just put his hand up and they were healed apparently. So you know, so there's a lot of questions like that. The other thing, he goes to the airship that crashed, of course, Victor's airship, whatever way you want to call it, where Kawaki came from, and finds something, picks it up, and then later on in the episode reveals that this nearly got like sliced in half. Tell me, Kashin Koji, what was this doing there? So they're continuing the whole, is Kashin Koji potentially the Kara traitor arc. We do a quick cutaway to just him still kind of like in the village, kind of watching over what's going on. But it feels like, oh, has Boro found evidence that like is the proof of here's what actually happened? And it feels like that's actually what the way that they're going. It feels like they are moving towards like the cult thing is the cult thing. We'll maybe get back to that at some point, but right now we're pretty plot focused. Boro is just going to maybe tell this piece of information to someone. Now, is he going to give it to Amado, who's like leading the investigation? That would sort of make sense, but we'll see where they go. So they're my thoughts on the episode. Like next week's going to be really good as well, but I'm guessing it'll be more like 204. Like 203 is next week. 204 will probably be when like the action really kicks off. But they're continuing with the adaptation, and they're going to have to continue with the adaptation for a while because there's not really a particularly good natural breakpoint in the manga for quite a while, just because stuff keeps happening. So I'm wondering, will they eventually have to have more of a sort of like unnatural breakpoint, like happened in Naruto Shippuden at times, when like you'd just be in the middle of an arc and suddenly get cut to a filler arc? Will they have to do that at a certain point here? They've still got a good few chapters. Like we just did chapter 35 here. We're looking ahead to like what chapter, like 58 or 59. Can't remember exactly which one. So like we've got 20 plus chapters ahead of us. So they're not in too much trouble yet, but they're focused still on doing manga content. So there just needs to be that kind of like watch out, like that we're in an amazing run at the moment because we've been very manga focused for the last like ages. It's going to have to run out at a certain point because we're catching up slowly but surely. So they're my thoughts on the episode. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.